Hi, I'm Mina.
And I'm Yules.
Thanks for tuning in to Artificially Informed.
Imagine a microplastic particle, just something so incredibly small that it's completely invisible to the naked eye.
Right. Just totally invisible.
Yeah, and it's floating in a glass of tap water. You drink it, not thinking twice about it.
Because why would you even notice?
Exactly. But down at the microscopic level, that tiny piece of plastic waste-like from a discarded water bottle is actually acting as a physical suit of armor for a deadly bacteria.
Wow.
It's literally making it immune to standard chemical disinfectants. We are essentially accidentally upgrading the enemy.
That's terrifying.
It really is. So welcome to the deep dive. Today we're pulling from this just massive stack of recent reporting across global news outlets. We're looking at everything from, astronomy and cutting-edge biotech to ancient archaeology and the really highly contested geopolitical borders of 2026.
There's a lot on the table today.
There is. And as we were reading through all these seemingly disconnected stories, this massive overarching theme emerged for us, which is basically the architecture of boundaries.
Yeah, and it's a really fascinating lens to view the world through right now, because we're constantly watching humanity, define, defend, and then occasionally just completely shatter the lines that separate us.
Right.
We see it in the microscopic membranes of artificial life being built in labs, or the digital paywalls erected by big tech companies.
Oh, absolutely.
In the atmospheric limits of our planet. And of course, the actual physical borders fought over by nations.
Exactly. So the mission today for you, the listener, is to just sit back while we sift through this huge mountain of information. We're going to filter out the noise and try to find the specific aha moments that explain basically the mechanics of how our world is actually functioning today.
Yeah, we want to know why these things are happening, not just what is happening.
Right. And just to set some expectations right at the top here, we're going to be tackling some incredibly charged political and global conflicts today.
We definitely are. And our approach here is purely journalistic. I mean, we're going to look at the strategies and the motivations on all sides. So from Washington to Moscow, left to right, we're just analyzing the implications and connecting the dots.
Right.
We're not endorsing any specific political viewpoint today.
No, not at all. The goal is clarity. But taking on this much information, it definitely requires a strong cup of coffee and a very comfortable chair.
Oh, for sure.
So settle in, because this is going to be a bit of an intellectual marathon. And I want to start by looking at, the ultimate physical boundary, right? The edge of Earth's atmosphere.
A big one.
Yeah. And our current, almost frantic rush to establish a permanent foothold on the moon.
The momentum in the aerospace sector right now is it's really unprecedented. We're looking really closely at NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, and their Artemis program.
Right.
Because this isn't just about, planting flags anymore.
Right. Been there, done that.
Exactly. It's about a sustained presence.
Yeah, and the Artemis 2 crew just made this highly publicized visit to Capitol Hill. And what really fascinated me in the political reporting was how they tied their mission directly to national identity.
Oh, yeah. It was a very specific strategy.
Totally. They recently wrapped up that incredible 10-day lunar flyby, and they used this Capitol Hill visit to secure future funding by explicitly linking their achievements to America's 250th birthday celebrations.
It's a very calculated, very smart political framing, honestly.
Yeah.
They're essentially standing before Congress and saying, look at the pinnacle of what we can achieve as a nation.
And they need the money.
They desperately need that political capital. Because the next phase of Artemis building the actual lunar infrastructure is astronomically expensive.
Pun intended.
Right, pun intended. And actually, as a quick side note to that mission, Canadian astronaut Jeremy Hansen, who was a key part of that Artemis 2 crew, he just announced he's stepping down from active duty.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And it's a really stark reminder of the immense physical radiation and just the psychological toll that these missions take on the human body. So he's handing the baton to the next generation.
Well, speaking of that next generation, what are they actually going to do once their boots hit the dust? Because Popular Mechanics had this incredible breakdown of the blueprint for a future moon base.
It's wild, isn't it?
It sounds like pure science fiction, but the engineering is very real. My biggest question reading this, though, was logistics. Because how do you build a base on the moon when it costs, millions of dollars to send a single payload of bricks into orbit?
Right. The short answer is you don't send the bricks.
Yeah.
You just can't. You have to use what's already there.
Okay.
In aerospace engineering, this is a concept called ISRU. That's in situ resource utilization. And the plan relies heavily on lunar regolith.
Which is basically just moon dirt, right? Like
Right.
really sharp, static charged dust.
Yeah, exactly. It's crushed rock that's been pulverized by billions of years of meteorite impacts. It's highly abrasive stuff. But through ISRU, engineers plan to use specialized microwave technology to actually melt the regolith.
Wait, melt it?
Melt it, yeah.
Yeah.
And then they feed it into massive 3D printers. So they will literally print the habitats layer by layer out of the lunar surface itself.
That is amazing.
Yeah, completely bypasses the need to launch heavy steel or concrete from Earth, which drastically cuts down the weight and the cost of the rockets.
Okay, so they're living in essentially 3D printed regolith igloos.
Basically.
But here's where my mind really got blown. You can't eat 3D printed moon dust.
No, definitely not.
Right. So scientists are mapping out how to feed these astronauts for months at a time, and they're planning to use hydroponics, so growing plants in nutrient-rich water. And aeroponics, where the plant roots just kind of hang in the air and are misted with nutrients, and that part makes sense for low gravity. But the biological kicker. They are seriously proposing composting organic human waste and mixing it with sterilized space rocks to create soil.
I know. It sounds entirely bizarre and maybe even a little gross.
Little.
Okay, very gross. But you have to think about it from a strict biochemical standpoint. Lunar regolith is completely sterile.
Right, nothing lives there.
Exactly. It has no organic matter, no nitrogen-fixing bacteria, just none of the biological components that make Earth's soil capable of sustaining plant life. So by combining human organic waste with the mineral-rich regolith, they are trying to artificially kickstart a closed-loop microbiome.
Wow.
They're literally manufacturing arable dirt on a dead rock out of their own recycled biology.
That is just wild. But setting the biology aside for a second, what about the psychological side of this boundary? Because you're living in a dirt hut, you're eating rock compost lettuce, and you are 238,000 miles away from a blue sky or a natural breeze. I mean, the isolation has to be crushing.
So it's actually considered one of the primary mission hazards. Sensory deprivation and the psychological toll of deep isolation, they can severely degrade cognitive function over time.
Right.
So to combat this, the current NASA blueprints heavily feature VR virtual reality integrated into their daily routines.
Wait, so they fly all the way to the moon just to put on a headset?
Essentially, yes. The VR is designed to simulate natural Earth environments. So an astronaut can put on the headset and take a simulated walkthrough, like a dense green forest in the Pacific Northwest.
Oh, I see.
Or sit in a virtual recreation of their own living room back home with their family's avatars. It provides the visual and auditory stimuli that the human brain evolved to need, which the sterile gray environment of the moon completely lacks.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so looking at this massive effort, NASA wants a permanent lunar presence by 2028. But meanwhile, you have the CNSA, the China National Space Administration, partnering with Russia on their ILRS.
Right, the International Lunar Research Station.
Exactly, and they're aiming for 2029. So I have to push back a bit on the romance of this whole thing. Are we really just building a pristine scientific utopia up there for the good of humanity? Or is this just the 21st century equivalent of a geopolitical gold rush, like a massive land grab?
Honestly, if we connect this to the broader geopolitical reality, it is absolutely a strategic land grab.
Yeah.
It's driven by a concept in international law called first mover advantage. Now, the Outer Space Treaty of 1967 says no nation can claim sovereignty over the moon.
Sure.
But the reality of infrastructure dictates the rules. So whoever establishes the communication relays, the solar power grids, the lunar mining operations first, they effectively set the operational standards and the economic rules of the road.
Because they're the ones writing the software and building the physical docking ports.
Precisely. It's about establishing a legal and economic precedent in an entirely new domain. So if NASA and its commercial partners build out the Artemis infrastructure first, Western legal frameworks, transparent commercial contracts, the Artemis Accords, those become the default standard.
And if they don't?
If China's CNSA and Russia establish their ILRS first, their state-controlled standards dominate the lunar economy. So the boundary up there isn't just physical, it's ideological.
That's a really intense way to look at it. But before we can even get to that lunar soil to fight over who owns the power grid, we have to navigate the space immediately around us. And honestly, we are kind of trashing the front porch.
Really are.
The space between Earth and the moon is turning into a massive orbital traffic jam.
Yeah, the congestion in low Earth orbit is becoming a critical issue. We're seeing this massive proliferation of satellite mega-constellations.
Right.
For example, Amazon's Project Kuiper recently launched 29 broadband satellites via an Atlas V rocket. They're trying to build out a massive network to directly compete with SpaceX's Starlink.
To blanket the globe in high-speed internet.
Exactly. Low-latency internet everywhere.
Which, on the surface, sounds fantastic. If you live in a remote region of the world, getting high-speed Wi-Fi beamed directly from space is life-changing.
Totally.
But I was reading reporting from space.com, and there is absolute panic among the astronomical community.
Oh, the panic is entirely justified. The sheer volume of these satellites, combined with the reflective materials used to build them, it's threatening to render Earth-based telescopes functionally obsolete.
But how exactly? I mean, space is huge, right? Can't the telescopes just sort of look around them?
It comes down to the mechanics of astrophotography. To see a distant galaxy or a really faint nebula, astronomers have to use long-exposure imaging.
Right, letting more light in.
Yeah, they open the telescope shutter for hours to collect as many ancient photons of light as possible. But because these broadband satellites are in low Earth orbit, they zip across the sky at incredible speeds.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Yeah, so during a long exposure, a satellite passing overhead leaves this massive, bright, white streak straight across the image. It completely corrupts the data. We're creating a form of industrial light pollution that we've just never had to contend with before.
It's like trying to take a picture of a beautiful landscape while 100 people are shining laser pointers directly into your camera lens.
That is a perfect analogy.
So to look past this digital fence we're building, we actually have to launch our telescopes beyond the traffic jam.
Yes, we do.
And NASA is preparing the Nancy Grace Roman Space Telescope. It's scheduled to launch in August 2026 on a SpaceX Falcon Heavy rocket.
The Roman Space Telescope is a truly fascinating piece of engineering. It's designed specifically to probe dark matter and hunt for exoplanets from deep space. So it'll be parked far away from the Amazon and SpaceX constellations.
Oh, yeah.
And its field of view is roughly 100 times greater than the Hubble Space Telescope. So it can map the universe at an unprecedented scale.
And what blows my mind is what happens when we do get a clear look past our own clutter. Astronomy just throws these curveballs that completely shatter our current understanding of physics.
Oh, constantly.
The reporting highlighted a recent discovery of a hot Jupiter exoplanet. Now, a hot Jupiter is a massive gas giant, similar to our Jupiter, but it orbits incredibly close to its host star.
Right, which makes it blisteringly hot.
Exactly. But scientists found that this specific planet has a hot spot, like a massive concentration of thermal energy, in completely the wrong place on the planet.
Yeah, that anomaly is keeping astrophysicists awake at night right now. Because based on all of our established models of atmospheric dynamics, a planet locked in a tight orbit like that should have its heat concentrated exactly at the subsolar point.
And the subsolar point being, what, the exact spot on the equator facing the star, like high noon?
Exactly, high noon. The star blasts that specific spot with radiation, and then high-altitude equatorial winds, which are driven by the planet's rotation and the Coriolis effect, they should carry that heat eastward. But on this newly discovered exoplanet, the hotspot is shifted in a direction that completely confounds our fluid dynamics models.
But how is that even possible? I mean, heat doesn't just move backward against a supersonic wind.
It shouldn't. It really shouldn't. The leading theory right now is that the planet possesses a magnetic field so incomprehensibly strong that it's physically interacting with the ionized gases in the atmosphere.
Whoa!
Yeah, creating magnetic friction that forces the heat to pool in the wrong location. It suggests atmospheric physics that we simply do not have the math to explain yet.
That's just so humbling. We think we have the universe figured out, and then a gas giant millions of light years away just breaks all the rules.
It really is.
It actually made me think of this fascinating historical piece I read, tying back to the whole America 250 theme. If we look at the sky of 1776, so 250 years ago, the moon was actually physically closer to Earth.
That's right, yeah. Due to tidal friction, the gravitational interaction between the moon and Earth's oceans, the moon is slowly spiraling away from us. It's moving at a rate of about 1.5 inches per year.
Okay.
So 250 years ago, it was roughly 31 feet closer.
And beyond just the physical distance, the relationship was entirely different back then. There was no industrial light pollution. The night sky was completely pristine.
Right.
The moon served as a vital clock, a calendar for planting, and a literal natural streetlight for agriculture. Humans had this really intimate, necessary relationship with the cosmos.
They relied on the natural boundaries of light and dark.
Exactly. And now I look at these satellite swarms and I have to ask, we are launching so much hardware to connect everyone on Earth, but are we accidentally building a digital membrane that just blinds us to the rest of the universe?
It's a profound question, really, of resource allocation and priority. We are heavily prioritizing immediate global commercial connectivity over our ability to fundamentally observe and understand the broader universe from the surface of our home planet. Like any boundary, this orbital shell we are building keeps our data in, but it is definitively blocking our vision out.
It's ironic, really. We build this digital membrane to look outward and connect, but the planet underneath that membrane is aggressively reminding us that we barely control our own environment. Nature is pushing back hard.
The climate and geological data crossing the desks of meteorologists right now is incredibly stark. We're looking at extreme weather disruptions, destabilizing infrastructure across the entire globe.
The reporting from the BBC on this was really intense. The UK is currently facing its third major heat wave of the year, with temperatures hitting 30 degrees Celsius, which is about 86 degrees Fahrenheit.
Right.
Now, to someone in Arizona, 86 degrees sounds like a cool spring day. But you have to understand the infrastructure boundary there. The UK is not built for heat.
Not at all.
Very few homes have air conditioning, the transit systems buckle, and the building materials are literally designed to trap heat, not expel it.
It creates a massive public health crisis because the built environment becomes actively hostile to the people living in it. And we saw a different version of this vulnerability back in the U.S. during the America 250 Independence Day celebrations.
Oh, right in D.C.
Right, down on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. Extreme 100-plus degree heat combined with severe, sudden supercell storms completely disrupted the national event.
I saw the videos.
Yeah, President Trump was actually delivering a speech, and the sheer intensity of the weather forced mass evacuations of the area.
It really shows that you can plan a multi-million-dollar national celebration. You can coordinate the Secret Service and the military. But if a heat dome parks over the city and destabilizes the atmosphere, everyone just has to run for cover.
Exactly. What's particularly alarming for environmental scientists, though, is how these primary climate shifts, like extreme heat trigger cascading secondary crises.
Right.
For instance, NASA's land satellites have been closely monitoring the Blue Mesa Reservoir in Colorado.
I saw those satellite images. The water looks like neon green paint. What exactly is happening there?
Those are massive toxic algal blooms, specifically cyanobacteria. And these bacteria thrive in unusually warm, stagnant water. So when the climate shifts and temperatures spike, these blooms just explode in size.
And they're toxic.
Highly. They produce cyanotoxins, which can be lethal to pets, wildlife, and highly dangerous to humans. We have the satellite technology to map the bloom from space in real time, but local authorities are completely struggling to manage the biological reality of it on the ground.
It threatens the entire local water supply.
Exactly, it's a boundary threat.
So the sky is baking us, the water is turning toxic, but the ground itself is also shifting. I want to talk about the geology reporting regarding the recent devastating earthquakes in Venezuela.
Such a tragedy.
It is. But amidst the sheer horror of tectonic plates shifting, there was this gripping, almost unbelievable story of a survivor named Hernan Gil.
Yeah, it's a miraculous case study in human physiological endurance.
Hernan was pulled alive from the rubble of a multi-story car park after 8 harrowing days. 8 days trapped in complete darkness, pinned under crushed concrete. I mean, how does a human body survive that?
Well, when a building collapses, the immediate threats are trauma and asphyxiation. But if a victim survives that initial collapse in a small void space, the clock starts ticking on hydration and something called crush syndrome.
What's that?
Without water, human kidneys typically begin to fail within 3 to 4 days. Hernan's survival for 8 days suggests he either had access to a small drip of condensation or ruptured pipes, or his body entered a state of profound metabolic conservation.
Wow.
Furthermore, if a limb is pinned under concrete, toxins build up in the muscle tissue. When the concrete is finally lifted, those toxins rush into the bloodstream all at once, which can cause instantaneous cardiac arrest.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so the rescue teams in Venezuela had to extract him with incredible medical precision to prevent that from happening.
It's terrifying, but it perfectly illustrates the theme today. If we pull back and look at these events, a heat wave canceling a heavily secured celebration, cyanobacteria poisoning a reservoir, tectonic plates erasing a city block in 10 seconds, it deeply emphasizes human vulnerability.
It really does.
We can engineer rockets to land on the moon, but we are still fundamentally at the mercy of Earth's massive natural systems.
And when the macro environment turns hostile like that, humanity's historic instinct is to look inward to find solutions. If we can't control the weather or the tectonic plates, we attempt to hack our own biology.
Right.
We'll try to rewrite the rules of life at the cellular level to adapt.
And the leaps in synthetic biology right now feel like we are literally playing God. I was reading a piece from Science Daily about researchers at the University of Minnesota. They just successfully built a synthetic cell from scratch. They are calling it a Spud cell.
The Spud cell represents a monumental leap in biological engineering.
Okay, break this down for me. What exactly did they do? Because it sounds like Frankenstein's monster, but under a microscope.
It's a bit more elegant than that. So a normal human cell has a genome of about 3 billion base pairs, directing tens of thousands of proteins. It's incredibly complex.
Right.
What the Minnesota team did was strip life down to its absolute bare minimum. They took just 36 purified enzymes and synthesized a tiny 90,000 base pair genome.
Wait, 90,000? From scratch?
Completely from scratch, yeah. Then they constructed a lipid bilayer, so a physical membrane, to encapsulate it. They built a functional cell from non-living chemical components.
But is it alive? Like, does it do what a living cell does?
That is the big philosophical debate currently raging in the scientific community. It is not technically classified as a naturally occurring living organism, but it exhibits all the mechanical properties of life.
Okay.
It can ingest nutrients from its environment, it uses those enzymes to grow, and most importantly, it can divide and replicate. The membrane they engineered successfully separates its internal controlled chemistry from the chaotic outside world.
They wrote the source code for a biological machine.
Exactly. And this capability to build life from scratch is forcing evolutionary biologists to completely redefine our understanding of how life originated in the first place.
Yeah, I bet.
There's concurrent research showing that the original emergence of life on Earth, specifically the formation of complex amino acids, wasn't just a simple linear chemical reaction like A plus B equals C.
What was it then?
It was a highly complex, tangled network of concurrent chemical interactions that somehow stabilized within a boundary.
And didn't researchers recently prove that this complex chemistry doesn't even need a warm, cozy Earth to happen? They recreated cosmic conditions in a lab, right?
Yes, the cosmic dust in a bottle experiment. Scientists took carbon-rich gases, put them in a vacuum chamber, and subjected them to the extreme cold, low pressure, and heavy radiation found in deep space.
And what happened?
They actually observed complex organic molecules, the precursors to amino acids, spontaneously forming. It proves that the building blocks of life don't require a planetary boundary to assemble. They can form in the harsh, irradiated vacuum of space.
Okay, so on one hand, we are intentionally engineering synthetic life with these spud cells and proving we can make life out of stardust. That's the utopian view.
Right.
But on the other hand, our industrial carelessness is causing some terrifying accidental mutations. I was reading the health reporting on nanoplastics in drinking water, and this ties perfectly back to what I mentioned at the very beginning of the deep dive.
It is the ultimate example of unintended consequences.
Yeah.
We've known for years that microplastics and nanoplastics have infiltrated every water system on the planet. But recent microbiological studies have uncovered exactly how these plastics interact with pathogens.
Right, because bacteria don't just float around individually, they build little cities, basically.
Precisely. Dangerous bacteria protect themselves by forming biofilms. It's a slimy, protective matrix that adheres to pipes or human tissue. And the new research shows that when tiny nanoplastic particles enter the water, they actually interact with the bacteria through electrostatic binding.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the plastics physically integrate into the biofilm, structurally reinforcing it.
So the plastic pollution is acting like rebar in the bacteria's concrete armor.
Yes, it makes the biofilm significantly denser and significantly harder to penetrate with standard chemical disinfectants like chlorine. Our industrial waste has crossed a biological boundary, and through horizontal gene transfer and physical reinforcement, it is actively upgrading the defenses of the very pathogens we are trying to eradicate.
It feels like we're hacking our own operating system. We are writing new intentional programs with spud cells, but we are also accidentally downloading malware into our water supply via microplastics.
That is a very apt analogy.
Yeah.
But to counter that malware, we are using unprecedented predictive capabilities. The University of Hong Kong recently unveiled a tool called Cardiomic Score. It's an AI-powered blood test designed to predict heart disease.
And not just predict it right before it happens, but 15 years in advance,
The
right?
full 15 years. The mechanics of this are incredible. Instead of just looking at standard cholesterol levels, the AI analyzes vast data sets of proteomics and metabolomics.
Meaning what exactly?
Meaning it looks at the thousands of specific proteins and metabolites in your blood. It uses machine learning algorithms to find microscopic patterns and warning signs that human doctors could never detect with the naked eye.
So you take a blood test at age 40, and the AI says, hey, based on this protein marker, you are going to have a massive coronary event at age 55.
Yes.
That gives you a decade-and-a-half head start to change your diet, start medication, and completely alter your fate.
It entirely shifts the boundary of medical diagnosis. We are moving from reactive medicine, treating the heart attack in the emergency room, to purely proactive medicine.
So we are mapping our biology, building predictive models to save ourselves. But this brings up a massive tension. This incredible technological innovation, whether it's AI, blood tests, or smart infrastructure, always seems to come at the cost of personal control and privacy. We are currently walking a very dangerous digital tightrope.
The boundary between the individual user and the massive corporation is shifting rapidly, and it's happening primarily through two avenues: the blatant monetization of features and the silent erosion of privacy.
Let's talk about the monetization first, because the reporting on Meta's new smart glasses is wild. The actual hardware technology is undeniably incredible. They have built-in acoustic beam-forming tech.
Right, it's a voice amplification feature. So if you are in a loud, crowded room, the glasses use directional microphones and AI processing to isolate the voice of the person you are looking at.
Okay.
It amplifies their speech and mutes the background noise directly into your ear. It's essentially a superpower for anyone with mild hearing loss.
And here is the massive digital paywall. Meta just slapped this hardware with a strict 3-hour limit. If you want to use this hearing enhancement for more than 3 hours a month, you have to pay a recurring subscription fee.
It is the literal commodification of human senses. You own the physical hardware on your face, but your ability to hear clearly is locked behind a corporate paywall. The boundary of what your own body can perceive is now mediated by a subscription tier.
That feels incredibly dystopian. And simultaneously, while companies are putting up paywalls to lock features away from us, we are seeing major vulnerabilities in the digital walls we build to protect ourselves. TechCrunch had a fascinating piece on a new "Don't Record Me" Zoom hack.
This is a perfect example of a boundary dispute in the modern workplace. Zoom, like many platforms, has heavily integrated AI tools to transcribe meetings, generate summaries, assign action items. It's marketed as a massive productivity boost.
But it's colliding head-on with employee privacy and consent. Because suddenly, every word you say in a brainstorming session, every offhand comment is being permanently transcribed, analyzed by an AI, and stored on an employer's server.
Exactly. And employees are pushing back. They are trying to find API endpoints or local hardware kill switches to hack the system so they can participate in the meeting without being algorithmically digested by their employer. Where does corporate productivity end and personal privacy begin?
Right. And you can't even rely on the companies that market themselves as privacy champions. Apple has always prided itself on building a walled garden to protect user data. But security researchers just exposed a massive bug in their Hide My Email feature.
For context, Hide My Email is designed to generate a random, unique email address when you sign up for a service, forwarding the messages to your real inbox. It's supposed to protect your identity from data brokers.
Right. But the researchers found a routing flaw in Apple's Relay servers that has actively been exposing users' real email addresses to third parties for over a year. A full year. So even the digital walls we intentionally build to protect our identities are fundamentally porous.
And governments are struggling to navigate these exact same digital boundaries, often with conflicting policies. Look at the recent announcement from the U.S. Department of Justice, the DOJ. They are officially allowing federal employees to download TikTok on their government-issued work phones again.
Wait, I thought the government universally banned TikTok on federal devices because of massive foreign espionage risks. The whole concern was that ByteDance, the parent company, could be compelled by the Chinese government to hand over location data and keystrokes of U.S. officials.
That was the consensus, yes. And the risk of data scraping hasn't disappeared. But the DOJ is now attempting to use app containerization, which is creating a secure partition on the phone to isolate TikTok from sensitive federal networks.
Oh, I see.
They are weighing the abstract risk of foreign espionage against the immediate, tangible benefits of public outreach. They realize that to communicate with younger demographics, they have to cross the digital border and operate on the platform where the audience actually is. It's a highly calculated and highly controversial risk assessment.
And speaking of the collision between government and social media, we absolutely have to talk about Trump Media's new Truth API, because this changes the mechanics of political communication entirely.
It is a very significant financial and political development. Trump Media and Technology Group has launched an API and application programming interface that charges institutional buyers, specifically algorithmic trading firms, $100,000 a month for direct, real-time access to market-moving posts made by President Trump on Truth Social.
Just so I understand the mechanics, a hedge fund is paying $100,000 a month just to get the data feed a fraction of a second faster than a regular user refreshing the app.
Exactly. Because in high-frequency trading, a fraction of a second is an eternity. If the president posts about a new tariff on foreign steel, the API feeds that text directly into an algorithm. The algorithm uses natural language processing to understand the sentiment, realizes steel stocks will plummet, and executes thousands of short sell trades before a human broker even has time to read the first word of the post.
Now, looking at the reporting on this, there are two fiercely debated arguments. On one side, you have the pure free market argument. Trump Media is a publicly traded company, and they have built a highly valuable data product. Selling a licensed API feed to high-frequency traders is simply creating shareholder value, which is their fiduciary duty.
Yeah, it is the corporate defense, yeah. But on the other side, ethics watchdogs and political analysts are raising massive red flags about the monetization of presidential communications.
Right.
It brings up profound questions about conflicts of interest. The argument is, should a sitting president be affiliated with a company that is directly profiting from his official policy statements by selling early access to Wall Street algorithms? It completely blurs the boundary between public service and private enterprise.
I have to interject with a broader thought here, though. We're talking about AI transcribing our work meetings, algorithms paying $100,000 a month to trade off politicians' posts before humans can read them, and smart glasses paywalling our own hearing. If the machines are talking to the machines and mediating all of our data, where's the space left for actual, unfiltered human interaction?
That is arguably the core existential anxiety of the modern digital age. We are building communication systems that operate at speeds far exceeding human cognition. The boundary of human agency, our ability to pause, reflect, and make a decision, is being aggressively squeezed out in the name of automated efficiency and data monetization.
This instinct to put up a paywall, to build a boundary around our data, or to weaponize information against an adversary, it feels so uniquely modern. But if we look at the historical and archaeological reporting, humanity has been trying to privatize advantages and wall off enemies for millennia. How we frame our history directly dictates how we draw our modern physical borders.
We are seeing this ideological clash playing out vividly in the United States right now, specifically revolving around the America 250 celebrations and the intense ongoing debate over immigration policy.
The media narrative is incredibly bifurcated. On one hand, you have the 250th anniversary events celebrating the foundational myths and the founding fathers. A major focus has been Alexander Hamilton.
Right.
Hamilton was an immigrant from the Caribbean who came to New York. He literally built the U.S. financial system. He established the Treasury, structured the national debt to ensure early American credit, and founded the first national bank. He explicitly wrote in the Federalist Papers about the economic vitality derived from a steady influx of immigrant labor and capital.
That is the historical narrative of an open boundary. But parallel to that celebration, we have the stark current reality under President Trump's administration. And again, looking purely at the reported data, there have been widespread reports of aggressive border enforcement, including over 10,000 migrant detentions in a span of just 5 days. Furthermore, the administration is heavily pushing what they refer to as Plan B.
What exactly is Plan B in this context?
It is a proposed executive and legislative strategy aimed at ending birthright citizenship. Currently, under the prevailing interpretation of the 14th Amendment, anyone born on U.S. soil is automatically a U.S. citizen. The administration is seeking to challenge and alter that legal boundary, pushing back against recent Supreme Court precedents to tighten who qualifies for the foundational right of citizenship.
So you have this massive societal collision, the celebration of an immigrant architect of the nation's past, clashing with a highly restrictive, heavily enforced present. And this domestic border policy is spilling over and creating international legal crises. The reporting covered a massive lawsuit recently filed at the ECOWAS court.
ECOWAS being the Economic Community of West African States. This is a fascinating intersection of domestic policy and international human rights law.
A coalition of international lawyers is currently suing the government of Ghana. The background is that the Trump administration has been establishing third-country removal agreements. This means they are deporting migrants from the U.S. border, not to their home countries, but to third-party countries that agree to take them, often in exchange for financial aid or diplomatic favor.
And Ghana has reportedly accepted dozens of these deportees, many of whom have zero cultural, linguistic, or legal ties to West Africa.
Which is the basis for the lawsuit.
Right. The lawsuit at the ECOWAS court argues that by accepting these individuals, Ghana is violating international principles of non-refoulement, essentially. Human rights laws that prevent states from receiving or transferring individuals to places where they face severe risks of persecution or lack basic legal rights. It highlights how a strict border enforcement policy drafted in Washington physically forces a legal and ethical boundary dispute onto the African continent.
It really illustrates how a stroke of a pen in D.C. creates a human crisis in Accra. But humans drawing lines in the sand, exiling outcasts, and fiercely protecting their elites, that is a tale as old as civilization itself. You brought some incredible archaeology stories to the table today that prove this point perfectly.
I did. Let's look at how the ancients handled their personal boundary disputes. In the town of Heerlen in the Netherlands, archaeologists were excavating beneath a town square and unearthed a 2,000-year-old Roman lead curse tablet.
A literal curse tablet, like a hex?
Yes. In antiquity, they were called defixions. Lead was a common material because it was heavy, durable, and associated with the underworld. What makes this specific tablet exceptionally rare is that while it was found in a distant Roman settlement in northern Europe, the curse itself is meticulously inscribed in ancient Greek.
How did it work? Did you just write, "I hate my neighbor," and throw it in a river?
It was a very formalized ritual. If someone crossed your boundaries, stole your property, cheated you in business, or even slighted you romantically, you would hire a scribe. You would write down your specific grievance, explicitly name the adversary, and invoke specific deities of the underworld to enact divine physical harm upon them. Then, you would roll up the lead tablet, sometimes pierce it with a nail to bind the curse, and bury it underground, often in a grave or a well, to deliver it to the gods.
I'm sorry, but going out of your way to find a scribe who speaks Greek just to officially curse your neighbor in lead is a level of petty that I deeply respect.
It demonstrates the extreme, tangible lengths individuals would go to exert control over their social environment and punish those who cross their personal boundaries. But contrast that aggressive, lead-bound punishment of an enemy with how ancient societies protected their own elites. In the Hesse region of Germany, archaeologists recently unearthed a 2,500-year-old Celtic prince's chariot grave.
And when we say prince, we are talking immense wealth, right?
Unimaginable wealth for the Iron Age. The burial chamber was intricately constructed and lavishly adorned. It contained a fully intact, bronze-fitted war chariot. It was filled with ceremonial gold jewelry and artifacts that indicate vast trans-European trade networks. It was a physical monument designed to project power and wealth into the afterlife. But there is a massive, lingering mystery for the archaeologists. The prince's body is completely missing.
Wait, the gold and the chariots are just sitting there, but the body is gone. Was it grave robbers?
That's the logical first guess, but the stratigraphy of the soil and the placement of the artifacts show the grave was left completely undisturbed for 2,500 years. Grave robbers take the gold. They don't carefully extract a skeleton and leave the treasure.
So what happened to him?
Scholars have two working theories. One is, environmental highly acidic soil conditions could have completely dissolved the bone matter over millennia, leaving only the metal. The more fascinating theory is that it represents a complex secondary burial practice. Perhaps the body was ritually interred for a time, and then the community returned, exhumed the bones, and relocated them to an even more sacred boundary, leaving the physical wealth behind as a permanent marker of his status. It leaves this perfect architectural boundary of a grave holding all the wealth, but utterly empty of the human it was built for.
It really makes you think. 2,000 years ago, if you wanted to destroy an adversary, you buried a lead tablet invoking the gods of the underworld. Today, if an administration wants to enforce a boundary, they draft a third-country removal agreement, or an algorithmic trader pays $100K for an API feed to short a stock. We use different tools, but the human instinct to define our borders, protect our wealth, and exert control over our enemies hasn't evolved at all.
The underlying psychology is identical. We just have infinitely more destructive, expensive, and far-reaching tools at our disposal to enforce those instincts today.
Which brings us to the most volatile boundaries of all, modern geopolitical brinkmanship. Those ancient methods of drawing strict lines in the sand are playing out right now on the largest, most violent scale possible. The physical borders we mapped out over the 20th century are currently under immense violent stress.
The primary arena where we are watching this stress fracture the established order right now is the NATO summit, currently taking place in Ankara, Turkey. We are witnessing a profound public fracturing of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization alliance.
And looking at the reporting from the summit, President Trump has brought some truly unprecedented ultimatums to the table, challenging the very foundation of the alliance. First, he has forcefully reiterated his desire for the United States to take sovereign control of Greenland from Denmark.
And this isn't just a real estate play. Greenland is geostrategically vital. As the ice melts, it is opening up massive, untapped veins of rare earth minerals, like neodymium and dysprosium, which are absolutely critical for manufacturing modern defense technology, guidance systems, and battery storage. The U.S. views it as a necessary resource boundary to secure against Chinese market dominance. Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen has firmly rebuffed the demand, stating unequivocally that Denmark will defend Greenland's autonomy.
But the U.S. is using massive financial leverage to enforce its will on the alliance. The reporting highlighted an unprecedented move. The U.S. has officially cut defense trade with Spain by a staggering 50%.
The justification cited is Madrid's repeated failure to meet the NATO obligation of spending 2% of their GDP on national defense. By cutting defense trade by 50%, the U.S. is essentially saying, if you do not pay for the maintenance of the boundary, we will not supply you with the tools to defend it. It represents a massive shift from NATO as an ideological brotherhood to NATO as a strict transactional ledger.
And it seems the American public is heavily mirroring this transactional skepticism. A recent poll published by Politico reported that faith in NATO among the American public has officially dropped below 50%. Less than half of the country believes maintaining this European boundary is actually worth the financial and military cost to the U.S. taxpayer.
And this internal political fracturing is happening at the absolute worst possible time because the alliance is facing massive external escalation, specifically regarding the ongoing Ukraine-Russia conflict. The intensity of the warfare has severely escalated in recent weeks. Russia recently launched a massive, coordinated ballistic missile and drone strike deep into the Ukrainian capital of Kiev.
Mayor Vitaly Klitschko called it one of the largest and most destructive strikes of the entire war. There were over 20 civilian deaths reported. Russia's defense ministry claims they were specifically targeting Ukrainian drone guidance factories and electronic warfare facilities hidden within the city infrastructure.
And Ukraine is no longer just defending its own borders. They are actively retaliating deep inside sovereign Russian territory, attempting to cripple Russia's logistical boundaries. Ukrainian long-range, explosive drones recently targeted the Omsk oil refinery in Siberia, disrupting the fractional distillation processes critical for Russian fuel supplies. But even more critically, they attacked the Blue Stream gas facility in the Krasnodar region.
Why is the Blue Stream facility so critical?
Because Blue Stream is the primary pipeline exporting Russian natural gas directly across the Black Sea to Turkey.
Wait, so Ukraine is actively bombing the energy supply chain of the very country that is currently hosting the NATO summit?
Yes. It illustrates the impossible geopolitical knot the alliance is tied in. Ukraine is attempting to defund the Russian war machine, but in doing so, they are threatening the energy stability of a vital NATO ally whose support they desperately need.
That is a massive, tangled web. But the alliances are fraying on Ukraine's western border, too. I was shocked by the reporting on Poland. For the first 2 years of this war, Poland was Ukraine's most steadfast, loyal military sponsor. What went wrong?
Historical boundaries and ancient grievances are reopening and poisoning the modern alliance. There is a deep, complex rift between Kyiv and Warsaw right now over historical memory. Ukraine recently held state-sponsored celebrations for the birthdays and even reinterred the remains of World War II nationalist figures like Roman Shukovich and Andrei Melnik.
And to put it mildly, these figures are highly controversial, correct?
Controversial doesn't quite capture the severity. These men were leaders associated with the Ukrainian Insurgent Army, the UPA. While modern Ukraine views them as early freedom fighters who sought an independent state, Poland holds the UPA directly responsible for the Volhynia massacres in 1943, where tens of thousands of ethnic Polish civilians were brutally ethnically cleansed. From Warsaw's perspective, Ukraine's glorification of these figures is an overt endorsement of historical wartime atrocities against the Polish people.
It's blood memory, and it's escalating rapidly. The reporting noted that a prominent Polish official was allegedly placed on a Ukrainian nationalist kill list online, and Poland's president is now publicly slamming President Zelensky's administration. Poland is actively reconsidering and potentially pausing its unwavering military and artillery support for Kyiv entirely over this historical dispute. It is truly incredible and terrifying how an ethnic grievance and a boundary dispute from 1943 is directly dictating whether artillery shells are shipped to the front lines in 2026.
History rarely stays buried. And to add yet another layer of fracture to the European boundary, Germany has taken a drastic legal step. They are officially escalating their investigation into the 2022 underwater sabotage of the Nord Stream gas pipelines.
They actually named a suspect, right?
Yes. German prosecutors have officially escalated the case to a war crime investigation, and they are actively prosecuting a Ukrainian national, a former Special Forces diver named Sergei Kuznetsov.
The geopolitical irony here is almost too thick to cut. Germany is essentially accusing a Ukrainian military operative of committing a sophisticated underwater war crime, deliberately destroying critical German energy infrastructure. Yet, Germany is simultaneously one of the largest suppliers of tanks and weapons to the Ukrainian government.
It is a geopolitical paradox. A nation is arming the very state it accuses of sabotaging its energy boundary. And if the European theater is a tangled knot of alliances, the Middle East is an active tinderbox where the boundaries are actively burning.
The regional escalation is relentless. We recently saw the U.S. and Iran cross a massive red line, exchanging direct kinetic military strikes following the tragic deaths of 2 U.S. soldiers in a drone attack on Tower 22 in Jordan.
The direct exchange of fire stripped away the usual layer of proxy warfare. And amidst this heightened tension, the internal dynamics of Iran were on full display. The reporting covered the massive funeral procession in Tehran for Iran's late supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei.
The scale of that funeral was staggering. A 20-kilometer procession through the city, millions of people in the streets. And the anti-American sentiment wasn't just palpable, it was institutionalized. There were massive, state-sponsored, Kill Trump banners hanging over the procession route.
It was a massive projection of state power and ideological boundaries. But what intelligence analysts focused on was a glaring omission. Khamenei's son, Mojtaba Khamenei, who was widely considered a leading candidate to succeed his father, was noticeably missing from the public ceremonies.
He missed his own father's state funeral. Why?
Intelligence reports suggest it was due to severe security risks and intense paranoia regarding potential targeted strikes or internal power struggles. Even during a moment of supreme national mourning, the internal security boundaries within the regime required the potential heir to remain hidden.
And right next door to Iran, the physical map of the Levant is being forcibly redrawn by military action. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz just made a defining announcement regarding Israel's military posture.
Yes. Minister Katz announced that Israel intends to indefinitely occupy strategic swaths of territory in Gaza, southern Lebanon up to the Litani River, and parts of Syria.
Indefinitely. That is a massive shift from temporary military incursions.
Katz stated, this extended occupation is an absolute necessity to maintain a physical security buffer against rocket fire and border incursions. But diplomatically and legally, it represents a permanent redrawing of territorial boundaries through military force. It is an explicit rejection of diplomatic withdrawal, substituting international border agreements with fortified, militarized perimeters.
So if we pull back from the drone factories in Kyiv, the APIs on Wall Street, and the artillery in the Middle East, if we synthesize all of this, what picture emerges?
The picture that emerges is one of profound, fragile interconnection. We see how completely tethered the global supply chain of security has become. An explosive drone strike deep in Russia threatens the natural gas supply in Turkey. A presidential election in the United States fundamentally alters the military spending and defense posture of Spain. And bitter, unresolved historical grievances from World War II in Volhynia are determining the survival of modern cities in the Donbass today. Every single boundary we draw, whether it is a tariff on steel, a militarized buffer zone in Lebanon, or a gas pipeline on the floor of the Baltic Sea, is physically and politically tethered to a dozen other geopolitical tripwires.
It is incredibly overwhelming to look at the whole board at once, but it is absolutely essential to understand how the mechanics of these boundaries actually work. Thank you for acting as our guide through this massive stack of global news today. It really helps clear up the muddy waters of the 24-hour news cycle.
It's always my pleasure. And I want to leave you, the listener, with one final overarching thought to mull over as you digest all of this. Consider that synthetic spud cell we discussed earlier from the Biotech lab in Minnesota. The scientists were only able to create that spark of artificial life by carefully constructing a lipid membrane. They had to build a physical wall to separate the controlled, living internal chemistry of the cell from the chaotic, destructive external environment. In biology, life fundamentally requires a boundary to function. And throughout this entire deep dive, we have seen humanity desperately trying to build similar membranes on a macro scale. We are deploying massive satellite swarms to control the economic boundary of space. We are erecting digital paywalls to control our data and our senses. And we are using NATO treaties, deportation laws, and military buffer zones to control our physical borders.
We are trying to build the perfect membrane, but the universe keeps pushing back.
Precisely. The universe inherently resists containment. From the microscopic nanoplastics that are silently invading our water and empowering bacteria to defeat our defenses, to the massive hot Jupiter exoplanet that completely refuses to follow our mathematical rules of thermodynamics. The systems we exist within are too vast and too chaotic to be perfectly controlled. Our architectural blueprints and our border walls only go so far.
So the question for you to explore on your own is this. Are our frantic, relentless efforts to draw borders, build membranes, and maintain strict control actually securing our future? Or, by building all these walls, digital, physical, and political, are we inadvertently preventing the natural evolution, the global cooperation, and the adaptability that humanity will actually require to survive the next 250 years?
It is the ultimate test of our architecture.
It truly is. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.
Enjoying Artificially Informed.
Hit subscribe and share it with a friend.
From the left, the right, and straight from the algorithm.
Thank you.
Welcome to the debate. So last night marked the 7th consecutive night of airstrikes in the Middle East. Missiles are actively flying over the Persian Gulf, and, well, Brent crude has just violently crossed $90 a barrel.
Yeah, it is a massive, immediate escalation.
Right. But while the global focus is understandably fixated on the military escalation between the United States and Iran, something much more profound, and I would argue entirely permanent, is happening beneath the surface.
Oh, definitely.
Thousands of miles away from the Strait of Hormuz, in the central banks of Indonesia, the gold mines of Mali, and the agricultural corridors of India, nations are quietly and rapidly rewriting the underlying rules of the global economy.
And I mean, they are rewriting those rules in a state of absolute panic. The data we are pulling from this July 2026 economic and geopolitical landscape, it paints a really vivid picture of a planetary architecture under just unbearable stress.
Unbearable for the West, maybe.
Unbearable for everyone. We are looking at International Monetary Fund forecasts that are frankly flashing red across the board. They are explicitly warning that the interconnected systems of global trade systems, which, let's remember, have lifted billions out of poverty, they are fracturing in real time.
Which brings us directly to the central question of our discussion today, grounded in this exact latest data. As the conflict in the Middle East sends these shockwaves through global markets, how do we interpret this systemic fracture? Are we witnessing the catastrophic unraveling of the global economy? Or are we experiencing the painful but absolutely necessary birth of a decentralized multipolar planetary order?
Well, that is the core of it, isn't it?
Exactly. I will be arguing that the current energy and inflation shocks are, in fact, catalysts. They're accelerating the Global South's necessary decoupling from Western financial and security hegemony, and that is ultimately creating a more resilient, sovereign planetary system.
And I will argue that this fracturing of our international trade and security architectures is not a rebirth at all, but a disaster. Dismantling the integrated global economy is leading to widespread economic ruin. It is punishing emerging markets with insurmountable debt burdens, runaway inflation, and what looks like an unregulated descent into regional conflicts.
So let's lay out the foundation of these positions. The U.S.-Iran conflict exposes the fatal structural flaw of relying on a Western-managed global choke point.
The Strait of Hormuz.
Right. But rather than collapsing under the weight of $90 oil and disrupted shipping lanes, the Global South is waking up. They are actively insulating themselves. Just look at the concrete evidence happening right now. India and Indonesia are systematically working to lessen their reliance on the US dollar in bilateral trade.
Sure, there are bilateral agreements forming.
It's more than just agreements. In Africa, Mali has just established the Malian Office for Precious Substances to take total sovereign control over its artisanal gold sector. Now, this is a sector that generated 763 billion CFA francs. They're centralizing state control to keep that wealth internal rather than, letting it bleed out to foreign multinationals.
But that insulation comes with massive friction.
It does, yeah, but it's a necessary friction because the old system was fundamentally extractive. Point your attention to Latin America for a perfect example of why this shift is happening. Guyana reportedly lost $4.9 billion in 2025 profit oil entitlements because they lacked ring-fencing agreements with foreign oil corporations.
$4.9 billion. That's a staggering hit for a developing economy.
It is staggering, and for those who aren't deeply entrenched in energy finance, ring-fencing is basically a legal boundary. It prevents a massive foreign corporation from using the exploratory expenses of one unsuccessful oil well to offset their tax liabilities on a highly profitable, actively pumping well.
Right. It's a standard corporate maneuver.
But without that fence, the corporation legally drains the host nation's tax revenue. Developing nations are looking at data points like this and realizing the integrated global economy was designed to extract their wealth. What we are experiencing now is not the end of the world. It is the building of independent, sovereign resilience.
Well, you are pointing to a few sovereign regulatory maneuvers and calling it resilience, but you're kind of ignoring the macro-level devastation that this fragmentation is actually causing.
Devastation is a strong word.
It's the accurate word. This so-called transition is generating immediate global collateral damage. Let's look at the mechanisms behind the IMF's July forecast. They are explicitly warning that renewed hostilities in the Persian Gulf will accelerate global inflation, disrupt highly tuned supply chains, and basically unsettle financial markets everywhere. The macroeconomic reality is bleak, and frankly, the mathematics are unforgiving.
But the mathematics of transition are always difficult.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. Because it's beyond difficult. It's predatory. Let's look at the U.S. debt. The United States is now paying a staggering $23.8 billion a week in interest on its national debt.
$23.8 billion a week.
A week. Let's unpack how that actually works on a planetary scale. When the U.S. government has to pay that much just in interest every 7 days, it has to issue more treasury bonds at higher yields to attract buyers. That creates a giant vacuum cleaner over the global financial system.
Sucking the capital out of emerging markets.
Exactly. Capital flees emerging markets in Latin America, Africa, and Southeast Asia to seek the safety of high-yield U.S. treasuries. The result? Borrowing becomes incredibly expensive for everyone else. We are tracking worldwide going out of business trends right now, driven entirely by these high borrowing costs and sticky inflation.
Which is painful, yes.
When you break the integrated global economy, you don't punish the hegemons. You harm the planet's most vulnerable populations first. Inflation, in this fragmented system, is essentially the hidden tax that the global South pays for Western geopolitical instability.
Okay, but that is exactly why the transition away from this dollar-dependent system is happening. You are accurately describing the pain of the current system to defend the current system, but let's dive into the core mechanisms here, starting with the energy choke point in the Strait of Hormuz.
I think we have to start there, yeah, because the narrative of forced adaptation completely ignores the immediate human cost. Roughly a quarter of the world's seaborne oil and 20% of global liquefied natural gas passes through the Strait of Hormuz. You cannot replace that infrastructure overnight.
No one is saying it happens overnight.
But when missiles are flying over the Gulf and Brent crude spikes past $90, that conflict is not sparking innovation, it is sparking a global fuel crisis.
It sparks a crisis precisely because the system is poorly designed.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. It sparks a crisis because energy is the foundational input for human survival. When energy prices surge, it creates a cost-push inflation dynamic. This isn't inflation caused by consumers having too much money and buying too many things.
Right, it's supply side.
Exactly. This is inflation caused by the sheer cost of pulling fuel out of a war zone. If diesel costs more, it costs more to run the tractors that harvest the grain, the trains that move the grain, and the ships that cross the ocean. It ripples through every supply chain on the planet.
It does.
Petroleum reserves, or strong enough currencies to absorb the shock of expensive crude. They are left in the dark, literally and economically, while we sit here and theorize about multipolar futures.
You are focusing on the acute symptom rather than the underlying disease. Think of the Western-led global financial and energy architecture like a monocrop agricultural system.
Okay.
In agriculture, planting thousands of acres of a single genetic strain of corn is highly efficient in peacetime. It is incredibly streamlined and highly profitable for the people who own the farm, but it is entirely vulnerable to a single disease.
A blight.
Right. One localized blight, and the entire global harvest fails. The global economy is suffering from financial contagion because all these supply chains share the exact same vulnerable DNA. They require the US dollar, and they rely on Western secured transit routes.
A monocrop might be vulnerable, but it feeds 8 billion people. When you burn the field to plant something diverse, people starve in the interim.
But they are not burning the field. They are actively planting new, diverse crops to survive. What the $90 oil and the Hormuz disruption are doing is forcing necessary long-term adaptation away from this monocrop vulnerability. Nations are realizing they cannot rely on a single choke point.
Do you have a specific example?
Look at Iraq. They are accelerating plans for a Mediterranean pipeline that would move crude directly to ports in Turkey and Syria, bypassing the Strait of Hormuz entirely.
But you don't just snap your fingers and build a transnational pipeline through the Middle East. Pipelines take years of bureaucratic wrangling, physical construction, and massive capital investment. And as we just established with the U.S. debt vacuum, capital is currently incredibly expensive.
The adaptation isn't limited to multi-year infrastructure megaprojects, though. It is happening right now in domestic policy. Look at India's response to this exact data.
The ethanol mandate?
Yes. To insulate itself from Middle East volatility, New Delhi isn't just complaining about the price of oil. They are fundamentally restructuring their agricultural and transport economics. They are actively pushing a fuel mandate for E20. That's a 20% ethanol blend in their fuel supply.
Right.
They've even approved E100 vehicles to shift towards 100% biofuel-powered transport. They are utilizing their own domestic agricultural capacity, diverting surplus crops to ethanol production to systematically reduce their reliance on imported crude oil.
But at what cost?
This crisis is the catalyst forcing a nation of 1.4 billion people to diversify its energy sources. It is the painful but vital shift away from a brittle monocrop economy to a diversified, resilient planetary ecosystem.
You're pointing to a 20% ethanol blend as a massive geopolitical victory, but you're kind of ignoring the secondary mechanisms of that policy. When a nation of 1.4 billion people starts diverting arable land and surplus grain away from the food supply and into the fuel supply to escape high oil prices, what happens to global food prices?
Well, they shift, obviously.
They skyrocket. You are trading an energy crisis for a food security crisis. Furthermore, you're pointing to these long-term diversification plans while ignoring the immediate reality of global liquidity crises and the very real threat of financial weaponization. But financial weaponization is precisely why these nations are moving away from the West.
But when you fracture the integrated financial and security system, you don't get a utopian network of self-reliant states peacefully trading in their own currencies. You get a fractured West, which directly leads to profound global instability. The centralized system, flawed as it was, provided guardrails.
Guardrails for whom? Because the fractured West we are seeing in the July 2026 data is proof that the old order is completely obsolete and incapable of providing stability even to its own members.
How so? Look at the diplomatic fallout happening right now. Germany's defense minister, Boris Pistorius, has explicitly rejected Donald Trump's demands for blind loyalty to NATO. Pistorius asserted that the alliance must function on consensus, not dictated terms.
A serious reft, admittedly.
And in return, Trump is publicly calling Europe the third world and threatening the European Union with 100% tariffs on goods. The West is fundamentally turning on itself Because of this extreme volatility at the center of the empire, the rest of the planet has absolutely no choice but to de-dollarize and form new alliances.
I hear that, but
I mean, how can the Global South trust an integrated system managed by a hegemon that threatens its own closest allies with catastrophic tariffs?
that assumes the alternative is safer. But have you considered what fills the vacuum when that Western hegemon steps back and the system fractures? A fractured West doesn't mean the Global South thrives in newly found sovereignty. It means the international order reverts to the law of the jungle.
I wouldn't call it the law of the jungle.
It absolutely is. Look at the immediate physical escalation resulting from this loss of consensus. This isn't just economic posturing over tariffs. The U.S.-Iran escalation has already resulted in 2 U.S. troops killed and 1 missing in an attack on a base in Jordan. The theater of military operations is widening aggressively because the deterrent effect of a unified Western alliance is gone.
It is widening because regional powers are demanding a say in their own security architecture rather than just accepting terms dictated from Washington.
They are demanding it through the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. In the background of this exact same dataset, we have reports that the U.S. is ready to sign a draft deal, letting Saudi Arabia pursue its own nuclear program and enrich uranium.
Ah, yes.
Crucially, without the gold standard, enhanced IAEA safeguards. Let's explain why that matters. That International Atomic Energy Agency gold standard is what normally gives weapons inspectors the legal authority to conduct short-notice, intrusive inspections of all nuclear facilities declared or undeclared.
It's a very strict monitoring protocol.
It is the only mechanism the planet has to ensure uranium enrichment is strictly for civilian power and not for a clandestine weapons program. Waiving those safeguards in Saudi Arabia, that isn't sovereignty. That is tacit approval of a nuclear arms race in the most volatile region on the planet.
Which indicates a massive tectonic shift in power dynamics. The U.S. is having to make concessions it never would have made 10 years ago because it no longer holds all the leverage.
It indicates an unregulated arms race. This multipolarity you are praising as a necessary evolution isn't a peaceful transition to self-reliance. It is a recipe for widespread regional wars.
I think that's a pessimistic view.
It's the realist view. When the centralized security architecture degrades, regional powers stop relying on diplomacy, international courts, and economic integration. They start relying on hard power, proxy militias, and nuclear enrichment. The true cost of this fragmentation is paid in blood, in displaced populations, and in an arms race that threatens planetary survival.
That brings us to a crucial philosophical and really geopolitical crossroad. If the centralized U.S.-led system was so universally beneficial, so rich with these diplomatic guardrails you mentioned, why are we seeing alternative security and economic architectures forming so rapidly?
Well, they're forming out of opportunism.
And I'm not just talking about the Middle East. Look at the Pacific. We are tracking the Russian Pacific Fleet and China conducting the joint C-2026 naval drills in Qingdao. These nations aren't just reacting blindly to American tariffs. They are actively building a new planetary framework.
A military framework.
An integrated framework. They're integrating their naval and economic strategies because the old unipolar system failed to serve them. It only served the hegemon.
I acknowledge that shifting power dynamics are very real. The joint C-2026 drills are a clear, highly coordinated demonstration of an alternative power block asserting control. But we have to evaluate the planetary cost of this fragmented world, especially when it comes to shared existential threats.
Shared threats like climate change?
Climate, natural disasters, all of it. Global crises require unified planetary responses. Multipolarity, in its current chaotic and highly militarized form, destroys our capacity to coordinate on things that actually matter to human survival.
Wait, you don't think establishing regional stability matters to human survival?
I think managing planetary disasters matters more. Take the recent devastating earthquakes in Venezuela.
A tragic situation, absolutely. The loss of life there is just staggering.
Beyond tragic, we had reports in the data of a survivor being pulled from the rubble after being trapped for 8 agonizing days. The local recovery efforts are heroic, but the international response is severely hampered.
Because of the political climate.
Because effective humanitarian recovery requires the very integrated, rules-based coordination that is currently being dismantled. In a highly fragmented, multipolar world, how do you manage global disaster relief? How do you fly heavy-lift equipment into a disaster zone when airspace is contested by regional rivalries?
Local actors step in.
How do you wire international relief funds when half the world is operating on a different financial messaging system to avoid U.S. sanctions? You can't.
But that highlights the flaw of the old system.
Let me finish this point, because it extends to the climate as well. How do we manage climate mitigation as we are currently seeing extreme heat waves costing the European economy billions in lost productivity, when regional powers are grabbing territory, erecting protectionist tariffs, and engaging in proxy wars?
You're assuming the old system managed those things well.
Better than this, the cost of this geopolitical transition is that when a natural disaster strikes, or a pandemic hits, or the climate crisis accelerates, the global community is too fractured, too suspicious, and too bogged down in regional arms races to respond effectively. The Earth doesn't care about multipolar sovereignty. It requires a unified logistical response.
The premise of your argument rests on the idea that the integrated system actually provided that unified, benevolent response. It rarely did.
It provided the framework for it.
The integrated system you are defending often used its coordination not for universal humanitarian good, but to enforce economic compliance. If a nation didn't vote the right way at the UN or didn't open its markets to Western corporations, it found itself cut off from that very relief system.
So the solution is to burn the system down?
The solution is what we are seeing in the data, the creation of localized sovereign resilience. The Global South is realizing that true security doesn't come from relying on a centralized power that might sanction you or weaponize the dollar against you the moment you disagree with their foreign policy.
It comes with massive instability.
True security comes from internal capacity. When Mali wrests control of its gold from foreign entities to build its own treasury, when India pivots its massive agricultural sector to ethanol to power its own transit, when Indonesia lessens its reliance on the dollar to trade directly with its neighbors, they are building the internal capacity to handle their own crises.
But the transition costs.
Yes, the pain of $90 oil and the sting of inflation are severe. These are the transition costs. We are moving from a unipolar extractive system where a few Western nations control the choke points to a more self-reliant multipolar planet where nations actually govern their own resources and currencies. It is a painful birth, but it is an evolutionary necessity for a balanced planet.
And I maintain that dismantling the integrated global economy is a profoundly dangerous, completely untested experiment. We don't have to guess what the outcome will be. We are already seeing the results in the July 2026 data.
The data reflects the friction of change.
It is yielding runaway inflation that acts as a regressive tax on the world's poor. It is creating massive debt burdens where the U.S. alone absorbs $23.8 billion a week just to service its debt, starving developing nations of essential capital.
Which forces them to adapt.
And it is sparking escalating, widening military conflicts across the Middle East with absolutely no unified crisis management framework to stop the proliferation of nuclear material. We are actively trading a flawed but historically functional global order for a chaotic, hyper-militarized free-for-all where the most vulnerable populations on the planet bear the absolute brunt of the suffering.
Well, as we look across the spectrum of this data, what we can both acknowledge without hesitation is that the era of uncontested Western economic and security hegemony has definitively ended. The evidence is simply irrefutable. We see it in the skies over the Persian Gulf, in the naval maneuvers in the South China Sea, and even within the fractured, highly volatile diplomatic rhetoric of NATO itself.
Agreed. The fundamental architecture of the globe has changed. The old rules of global integration no longer apply, and the geopolitical center of gravity has undeniably fractured into multiple, competing spheres of influence.
We ask you,
the listener to reflect on the necessity of viewing these economic and geopolitical shocks from a planetary perspective, rather than a strictly Western one. Look at the mechanisms driving these headlines. The true cost of this transition, and perhaps its hidden promise for a more balanced world, is buried deep in the data we've discussed today. We invite you to continue exploring the intricacies of this global realignment and what it means for the future of the planet on your own.
Because regardless of whether this is a rebirth or a collapse, the tension in the system is only increasing.
Exactly. When the central pillars of the global order fracture, the entire architecture of the planet must be reimagined.
That's it for today's Artificially Informed.
Thanks for spending your time with us.
Yeah.
Stay sharp, stay curious. See you next time.